Before we begin today, I want to acknowledge the recent tragedy at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, which occurred coincidentally on the same day that I finished reading this book. 17 lives were lost in what was the 18th shooting of 2018 in the United States, the 18th school shooting. Things are not getting better. Things are getting worse. And we have to do something about it. We need new laws, new regulations to prevent something like this from happening again. Out of respect for those who lost their lives in Florida or anywhere else, any school shooting, any shooting anywhere, today we're not going to be pairing a drink with this book. I just can't do it today. Welcome back to Drunk on Writing and the first episode of the Bachman books, which will be an unfortunately solemn occasion. Things are also going to go a bit differently today in this episode because one, we're going to talk about who exactly Bachman is, and two, the book we're talking about, Rage, you can't buy this book anymore. It is now out of print. I had to stalk eBay for my copy. If you find today's video worthwhile, please subscribe to the channel, head on over to patreon.com/Pawlowski and sign up. And if you're feeling really gracious and the recent events have struck you on an emotional level as they've struck me, please be sure to go and donate to a charity of your choice, whether to gun control or to mental health, anything. Doesn't matter which side of the political spectrum you're on, I think everyone agrees something needs to be done. Now, let's talk Richard Bachman. This is Richard Bachman. Born in New York, he served in the Coast Guard before settling with his wife, Claudia Inez Bachman, in New Hampshire, where he wrote at night and tended to his farm during the day. The two of them had a son who unfortunately died at the tender age of 6, and Bachman, of course, would go on to die later on in February of 1985. Well, all that's a lie, of course, except for the death part, because Bachman died of an unfortunate case of cancer of the pseudonym, because Richard Bachman is, of course, a pseudonym for Stephen King. He was Stephen King. He is Stephen King. In that picture, that's Richard Manuel, insurance agent for Kirby McCauley, Stephen King's literary agent. When a collection, the Bachman books, which is what I was able to read Rage in for today, was eventually issued, collecting the first 4 early books by Bachman, Stephen King wrote an introduction called Why I Was Bachman. In it, he addresses every single rumor I've heard about as to why he was Bachman over the years, from him publishing too many books, to him wanting to try something new, to him just, wanting to not deal with the fame. And in this essay, he says that was his main drive, that ladder, that he wanted to see if he could do it again, if he was good at writing, or if it was just some kind of stroke of luck. As he put it, it is for some reason depressing to think it was all, or even mostly, an accident. So he wanted to see if he could do it again. Or rather, if Bachman could. It didn't quite work out as planned, mostly because King sort of underestimated his fans, because they figured it out real quick. And, I think it was probably for the good, maybe, because when Thinner was released, the 5th book published under the Bachman name, it sold only about 28,000 copies. But, and this is current as of the time that this introduction was written, when Thinner was published under the Stephen King name, it sold 280,000 copies. It's quite a difference. Now, if the experiment could have continued, I almost guarantee that Bachman would have gathered a following. In fact, he started to gather a following before everybody figured out that it was Stephen King. Though I'm a little reminded of that time that J.K. Rowling went out and wrote a book under a pseudonym and nobody bought it, and then her agent leaked that it was her and everybody picked it up and freaked out. But maybe J.K. Rowling is just not as good as Stephen King. I heard mixed reviews of that story, and certainly there are some mixed reviews for the Bachman books. Rage was not the strongest story of Stephen King's that I've read. Of course, it was an earlier book written before his other books that were published already under his own name. But we'll get more to that in a second. Because I just want to know, it is really hard to push a book on someone without that sort of brand name, especially today. Maybe it wasn't so hard back in the 70s or early 80s, but today, if you don't have a recognizable name, if you're not attached to some franchise or some new film that's going to come out, your book's just not going to sell. It's hard. And I'm going to say that's probably why my books haven't sold. Yeah, that's the reason, right? About 95% of the way through Rage, I was considering it to be King's best piece yet. Yes, better than Carrie, better than Salem's Lot, better than The Shining. But unfortunately, Rage is probably the first book by Stephen King that was published, in wide release, that I think completely and utterly falls apart at the end. And when I realized that, when I got to that point, I also realized that the entire concept of Rage was flawed, and it ruined the book for me. Despite the excellent writing, despite the excellent characterization, the book was done. The problem, I think, lies in the otherworldliness of the story. It opens with a student who is going through a rough time. He's obviously somehow mentally disturbed, and he goes into his classroom and he shoots his teacher in the head, and then he proceeds to shoot another teacher in the head, and he holds the classroom hostage. But then the story pivots, and it basically becomes The Breakfast Club with a hostage situation. It's Die Hard meets The Breakfast Club. And it doesn't really work. I mean, we've seen now, and maybe this wasn't the case when Rage was first published, we've seen a lot of school shootings. We've seen a lot of shootings in general, not just in schools. And people don't react like this in those situations. They don't sit there calmly, raise their hands, ask questions, and commiserate with the shooter who is still, throughout this entire story, sitting on top of a dead body or threatening to kill them, even though they believe that they won't be shot. And Rage really is weird right from the get-go. The whole situation just doesn't play out as realistic, even though it comes off as realistic. The writing comes off as realistic. The emotional disturbance, the flashbacks, the memories that are shared definitely ring true. But, you know what? Let me just quote right here and show you what I mean. Nobody said a word. They sat in utter stunned silence, looking at me attentively, as if I had just announced that I was going to tell them how they could all get passes to the Placerville Drive-In this Friday night. And then, this little bit a few lines later, Irma Bates broke the silence with a high, gobbling scream that sounded like a young tom turkey getting its neck wrung on the day before Thanksgiving. Nobody picked up on her scream, and she stopped, as if ashamed at screaming while school was in session, no matter how great the provocation. Look, I get shock. I get that in otherworldly situations like this, situations that we all fear that we will have to face at some point in our lives, especially now in the current climate where we have teenagers saying this is just a realistic thing that they have to face. Teenagers who say, yeah, I'm going to stand in guard and block my fellow friends because I volunteered for this. I want to take the bullets for my friends. They know that this is a realistic possibility. I just don't think if this situation arose that I would sit there in stunned silence staring at my dead teacher's body. Then again, I do remember a fight that I had in high school where I was shoving this other kid around and he was shoving me around, and then he punched me in the face. And I had this momentary lapse of kind of sanity because my glasses flew off. And I went over and I bent down and I picked up my glasses and I put them back on, and then I resumed the fight. And the whole time it was happening, the whole class, including the teacher, just looked on in stunned silence. Nobody said anything. Nobody could react. Nobody could really fathom what was happening. So, okay, I'll give Stephen King / Richard Bachman the benefit of the doubt there and say, yeah, okay, maybe children would react this way. Maybe they would commiserate with Charlie as he begins telling his story of why he feels he is this way, why he feels demented, why he feels he has to come and hold this classroom hostage, why he has to come there and shoot his teacher. Okay, possibly that could happen. Don't think so, but I'll give it that benefit of the doubt there, right? Because I guess we all have those kind of variations of memories, those ones that have the possibility of traumatizing us, of messing us up for life. Anybody who's gone through middle school and high school probably has some variation on a theme of things that we remember. We all have these kind of memories back in our minds and our closets, and for the most part, people will just leave them there. They are what they are. They are memories. They are things that happen, but we move on, we grow up, and we become adults, and we take on different responsibilities, and life goes on. Other people internalize it, and it damages, and it makes a big deal. And, we shouldn't make light of that kind of situation because it's very serious. And these are situations that never should have happened. In this case, the stuff that Charlie has to put up with from his dad, that man should not have been a father. He did some despicable things to Charlie, and it's very unfortunate. And he ended up messing Charlie. Charlie, of course, had what I would say were inherited mental issues. We see some information about his mom where she seems to be on some sort of medication. She seems to not be entirely well. We see her at one point, I think she's painting or she's playing the piano, and she's in a see-through negligee, and she's just waving at Charlie, and she comes out of the house when he has a little altercation with his father, and the husband is just telling her, go inside, put some clothes on, and she doesn't even care, of course, because her son has just been hurt. But, there are little hints like that something's not quite right. So sure, okay. Maybe even that part of the story is fine. Like I said, everybody has these stories, and maybe not stuff that we would all share on YouTube on a channel like this, but maybe they're there somewhere. Okay, I'll deal with that. But then the ending of Rage, that is not realistic. That I cannot buy. That took this shark, jumped over it, hopped, skipped, and jumped over it on a ski-doo. And it's not really a fault of King/Bachman, because the seeds are planted throughout the entire book. It's set up. If you go back through, you can see where it's coming. You see Ted constantly mouthing off, people looking at Ted, giving him a sour look. He is acting very peculiar compared to the rest of them. And they all slowly but surely turn against him. But when Charlie prompts the class and says, hey, everybody, there's one more thing that we all have to do, right? And they all raise their hands, and they all know exactly what they're doing. They gang up, and they beat Ted. That's not going to happen. I mean, the whole book takes place over about 2 hours, 2 to 3 hours, I think. You don't turn rational people into monsters that quickly. It can be done. We've seen some studies where that kind of thing can be done. But that quickly, and against someone their own age, in a hostage situation where the person that is talking to you has a gun in your face and has just killed 2 people, I don't think so. I can't buy that. And it absolutely ruins the book. Ted ruins the book. He's just not real. He is not a real character. He is not a real person in any way, shape, or form. Unlike the other students who you can see, you can sympathize with them. You can see that they have come from stuff and horrible backgrounds sometimes, or they're just thinking the regular teenage kind of thoughts that plague us at that time of our lives. But Ted is not like that. He is a plot device, is all that he is. And poor Ted. He wanted to do what was right, and he ended up getting put into a coma, I think. It was voluntary coma? Is he just catatonic because of the situation, or did they give him brain damage? The ending is a little bit vague. But it's so bad. It's just a bad ending, and it's everything that's great about the story. It's just all for naught, because the ending requires us as readers to step across this invisible line, the Terminator line, as is referenced throughout this book, to cross that line with the characters and say, yes, we know exactly what needs to be done. And I don't think it lands. I don't think it works. I never crossed that line. And maybe that's just because I'm sane. I don't want to attack my fellow man in that way. I don't see the necessity of it. And I don't think a whole classroom full of high school students would see the necessity of it either. Maybe I'm just hopeful? I don't know. Maybe it's just I don't have the issues that Charlie has in this book. Again, I think we all have certain issues, but maybe there's just that fine line between what is normal and what is worse. And, maybe that line is what every person who's ever pulled the trigger in a school shooting has crossed. Maybe they could sympathize with Charlie. And, some of them have. Like I mentioned, I got my copy of Rage in a now out of print first edition of the Bachman books. It's not in the Bachman books anymore. If you went to Amazon, if you went to Barnes & Noble, if you went to Books A Million, you cannot buy Rage. It's gone. It's disavowed. If you look in the also by Stephen King or also by Richard Bachman, it's not even listed anymore. It's just been completely ousted, erased from history. And I think it was Stephen King himself who decided to pull it out of print because it began to be associated, much as Catcher in the Rye would be associated with school shootings and people that were just losing their shit. Jeffrey Lynn Cox, a senior at San Gabriel High School in San Gabriel, California, held a humanities class of about 60 students hostage on April 26, 1988, with a semi-automatic rifle. A friend of Cox's told the press Cox had read Rage over and over again. Dustin L. Pierce, a senior at Jackson County High School in McKee, Kentucky, took a history classroom hostage on September 18, 1989 with a shotgun. Police found a copy of Rage in his bedroom. Scott Pennington, a student at East Carter High School in Grayson, Kentucky, shot his English teacher in the head, killed the school's custodian, and held the class hostage on January 18, 1993. He'd just written an essay on Rage. Barry Lukatis, a student at Frontier Middle School in Moses Lake, Washington, killed 2 students and his algebra teacher on February 2, 1996, then held the class hostage. Lukatis said he'd try to model his life after Rage's Charlie Decker. And finally, Michael Carneal shot 8 fellow students at a prayer meeting in West Paducah, Kentucky in December 1997. He had a copy of the Richard Bachman Omnibus, presumably the same one that I have, which includes Rage, in his locker. So yeah, after all of these events, Stephen King took it out of print. It was in the Bachman books for a little longer, but once that edition went out of print, once that sold out, he took it out of there as well. Like I said, you can't buy it anymore. You can't find it new. You can't find it as an ebook. It's not published online. As far as I can tell, nobody's really pirated it. It's probably out there if you dig deep enough. But I didn't see it. It didn't come up in like Google or anything. And, it's kind of like this long-lost Stephen King book. But I think it's good that it's lost. I really do. About halfway through the book, I had a very different thing in mind. I thought, hey, this should come back in print. It kind of gives an insight into the horrors that the children are facing. The horrors that these people come back to school or go to their schools and shoot their presumed friends, their fellow classmates. It kind of gives insights into their minds. But then the book doesn't really do that. Rage doesn't give the why. And that's what we need. We need a why in these kind of situations. What could we have done to prevent it? Would mental health care have helped Charlie in this? Would it have saved the victims that he killed? I don't know. Would it have saved Ted? I don't know. It's a question. If he didn't have access to a gun, would those people have been saved? Or would he have found another monkey wrench like he did early on in the story and attacked somebody with that? Look, I know Stephen King probably had a point that he wanted to make with this book. He wanted to bring light to something. But he failed in it. It just doesn't work. And if this book triggers something in people who then go on to conduct a mass shooting or feel an inclination to harm the people that they know, people that they've known for years, this book shouldn't be on stands. No book like that should be on stands. I know this dissection came off a bit negatively, and, I'm sorry. I can't really help that. Given my current mood, given the current political atmosphere, the current goings-on of the country, especially given I read this the same time that that massacre happened down in Florida. And we're seeing this uprising of a new generation, these new high school students who might change everything that we know about our country right now in a good way, I think. I couldn't help it. And I can't help feeling that this is the first real letdown in the Stephen King bibliography up to this point. Like I said, I thought this book was going to be the best of the best. 95% of the way through this book, I wanted it to be the number one in my ranking of the Stephen King books to date. And then it dropped right to the bottom. Couldn't help it. It jumped the shark. That ending was just horrible. And I will note, King released a follow-up of sorts to Rage. His essay, Guns, explores on some of the themes that he tried to explore with Rage and kind of goes into why he wrote Rage and the kind of thoughts behind it and his current thoughts on gun control. And if you follow him on social media, you probably already know his thoughts on gun control. He's all for it, spoilers. And as described on Amazon, in a pulls no punches essay intended to provoke rational discussion, Stephen King sets down his thoughts about gun violence in America. Best of all profits from guns go to the Brady campaign to prevent gun violence. Now, we won't be covering guns as part of this series, which is looking primarily at Stephen King's fiction work. But if you're interested in reading it, I highly recommend you do so. It's available as an ebook, also as an audiobook. And like I said, all profits go to a good cause. But if you want to go donate more to any of the great charities out there that are either tackling gun control or mental health care, please do so. I think I'm going to leave it at that. So, go subscribe at the YouTube page. Go subscribe at the Patreon if you want. I'm not really feeling the pitch right now, so until next time when we talk hopefully about a cheerier book, Night Shift, a series of horror short stories, which, I don't know, that's probably not going to be cheerier, but it's not going to be as realistic and horrible as this storyline, I think. But until then, cheers, and keep on writing.